Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Sivan Raviv, coming to you live from Israel, bringing you all the biggest headlines from across the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. Let's get into all of the latest developments of the last hour. A 48-hour deadline is ticking down toward a U.S. attack on Iran. Reports are indicating that the U.S. has given Iran a 48-hour deadline to submit a detailed nuclear proposal or risk the collapse of talks and a military attack. U.S. negotiators are set to meet Iranian officials in Geneva on Thursday and Friday, but only if Tehran delivers a plan Washington considers serious. President Donald Trump is reportedly holding a firm on a zero enrichment demand, while signaling limited flexibility if Iran can prove it has no pathway to a nuclear weapon. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi has confirmed he will attend the summit. Washington confirmed the talks as U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff warned Iran could theoretically be just a week away from enriching uranium to weapons-grade levels, a claim that stresses the urgency. President Trump has reportedly told senior advisors he is prepared to escalate dramatically against Iran if diplomacy or even an initial U.S. strike fails to force Tehran to abandon its nuclear program. According to officials briefed on internal deliberations, Trump is considering a limited military strike in the coming days as well, designed to send a clear message to Iran's leaders that they must give up any capability to produce a nuclear weapon. Potential targets reportedly include the headquarters of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, key nuclear facilities, and elements of the ballistic missile program. But the president has also signaled something far larger. If initial action does not work, he may consider a much broader military campaign later this year, one aimed at weakening or even toppling Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. As U.S. and Iranian negotiators are set to meet in Geneva Thursday in what appears to be a last effort to avoid conflict, behind the scenes a possible compromise is being discussed, allowing Iran a strictly limited enrichment program for medical purposes only. 2 U.S. aircraft carrier groups and dozens of warplanes are now within striking distance of Iran as the White House weighs its next move. And fresh anti-regime protests have erupted for a second day on Iranian university campuses, with students openly defying the Islamic Republic and waving the banned flag of the ousted Shah. Demonstrations were reported at 5 universities in Tehran and 1 in Mashhad, centered around 40-day memorial services for the thousands killed in last month's brutal crackdown on nationwide unrest. Videos from Sharif University of Technology show large crowds chanting anti-government slogans, with some students holding the pre-revolution monarchy flag, a highly symbolic challenge to the Islamic Republic. The latest rallies come weeks after what activists describe as the deadliest crackdown of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's rule. And as Iran now braces for the possibility of war with the United States and Israel, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has quietly restructured the Islamic Republic's power structure, entrusting much of the country's day-to-day control to his longtime ally, Ali لاریجانی. لاریجانی, a former Revolutionary Guard commander and now head of the Supreme National Security Council, has effectively been running crisis management since January, sidelining President Pezeshkian, as Tehran faces anti-regime protests at home and the threat of the military attack by the United States. Khamenei has ordered layers of succession for key military and government posts, naming multiple backups in case of assassinations or communication breakdown during an attack. A new National Defense Council has been established, and Parliament Speaker Galibash has been designated to command armed forces in times of war. Security forces from the besieged militia are preparing for street deployments to suppress unrest if ordered. Khamenei strikes a defiant tone, warning that any attack would be met with a devastating response, but behind the scenes, Iran's leadership is clearly preparing not just for war, but for survival. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will arrive in Israel on Wednesday for a high-profile visit that includes an address to the Knesset, talks with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and a visit to Yad Vashem. Netanyahu confirmed the visit at the weekly cabinet meeting, describing India as a global power and calling Modi a personal friend. The two leaders are expected to focus on expanding cooperation in high-tech, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. areas both countries see as strategic priorities. Modi responded on social media thanking Netanyahu and praising the relationship as one built on trust, innovation, and a shared commitment to peace and progress. Netanyahu said his broader vision is to build what he called a hexagon of allies across the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean, positioning India as a key partner in countering radical regional axis. Let's take a listen.
השבוע ניתן ביטוי ליחסים מיוחדים שנרקמו במהלך השנים האחרונות בין ישראל לבין המעצמה העולמית הודו וביני לבין העומד בראשה ראש הממשלה נרנדרה מודי. אנחנו ידידים אישיים, מדברים תכופות בטלפון, מבקרים זה את זה. מרקם היחסים הלך והתהדק והוא יבוא הנה כדי שנוכל להדק אותו עוד יותר בסדרה של החלטות שקשורות להידוק בשיתוף פעולה בין הממשלות, בין המדינות, שיתוף פעולה כלכלי, שיתוף פעולה מדיני ושיתוף פעולה ביטחוני.
הציג אותו. And with this 48-hour U.S. deadline ticking down and American carrier groups positioned within striking distance, tensions with Iran appear closer to confrontation than at any point before. Joining me now to discuss the latest developments is Professor Meir Litvak, head of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University, and Major in Reserves Elliot Chodov, political and military analyst. Thank you both for joining.
Good afternoon.
Elliot, can you hear me?
I can.
Great, thank you for joining us. So there is now a 48-hour deadline given to Iran to present the U.S. as an acceptable counter plan, or else. Do you believe this deadline to be real? We've heard threats before.
Everything is real, and at the same time, everything is not, especially with the current administration. Let's remember that this all began 6 weeks ago with President Trump telling the demonstrators, step it up, help is on the way, and it never arrived. The idea of 48-hour deadline sounds good, but unless an acceptable plan is presented, acceptable to whom? In other words, the decision to go ahead or not go ahead is a completely fluid one. If Witkoff says it's acceptable, then they continue negotiating. If he says it's not, then it's not. And what it actually says matters less than what the administration decides to do.
Do you believe that this is in Witkoff or the mediator's hands at this point?
It's in his hands in the sense that Trump relies on him. He trusts him. I believe that Witkoff was sent to make a deal. And personally, that's concerning to me because making a deal means giving in on points that perhaps in international strategy shouldn't be given in on. But ultimately, the decision is going to be Trump's. He's caught on the horns of a number of dilemmas as well, including his domestic base not supporting a military action against Iran. So where he's going to go and how he's going to decide is based really on his decision making. And as I said, will the Iranians will certainly present something. Whether it's acceptable or not is something that the Americans are going to decide.
Now, if Trump is demanding zero enrichment, is there any realistic path for Iran to agree to such a thing? Does diplomacy actually have a chance, in your opinion?
I don't believe the Iranians will agree to it. On the other hand, they can agree to it and then lie down the road. In other words, here again, there are layers of strategy. There are two U.S. aircraft carrier task forces, one here already, one on the verge of being here. If the Iranians come to some sort of an agreement and the Americans withdraw their forces, the Iranians can basically do whatever they want. Carrier task forces can't be turned around and brought back at will. Certainly not the Ford task force. The Ford needs to get back its longest deployment ever. So how much will the Iranians play a game? How much will they play brinksmanship? How much will they hope that they can get away with the window dressing? Again, these are decisions that are being made in Tehran. How much the Americans accept all of that are decisions made in Washington. Here, just to be clear, the reality, I think, has less impact than the decisions and perceptions of the leadership.
Now, Professor Meir Litvak, are you with us? I'd like to bring you into the conversation. Can you hear me, Meir?
Yes, there's a bad connection. I apologize, but I'm trying.
We'll give it a shot anyhow. So, Professor Litvak, what are your projections here? Is there a way back from all of these threats from the last few weeks, Trump's threats? Is there a real chance for diplomacy?
I think both sides, prefer a deal over confrontation. Of course, each demands a very significant price. It would lose a war, but it prefers confronting America, losing a battle, than making concessions, expose the regime's weakness, and then endanger it domestically. So
You're cutting out a little bit, Professor Litvak.
the Iranians losing a complete surrender to America.
So I wasn't sure that I was able to hear the full answer. Let's try just to get a few words. Do you believe that there's a chance for diplomacy?
I think there is a chance for diplomacy because I think both sides prefer a diplomatic deal over a war. Again, for the Iran regime, making a deal, going to war against the U.S.
I apologize. We are having some bad reception here. Professor Litvak, why don't you check your reception and let's try this in a few moments again. In the meantime, Elliot, can I continue with you? What could Iran actually agree to compromise on in a deal? Is there something that they could compromise on, in your opinion?
Honestly, they're not going to compromise, and they've been very clear. They on the issues of ballistic missiles, they're not even willing to discuss. On the issues of supporting Hezbollah, Houthis, and other terrorist organizations, proxies and otherwise, they're not willing to discuss. The nuclear issue is always up for discussion with them, as we've seen in the past, because it's eminently easy for them to cheat. They will not agree to zero. Again, unless it says total window dressing for a month. And I agree with Professor Litvak, they have to be very careful not to show weakness because they do have an opposition that's waiting to jump out there. We see that with the student demonstrations today on the 40th anniversary, the memorial to those who were killed. So they have to be seen as strong because if not, they can lose the regime. Realistically, they can agree to some sort of percentage of enrichment because we know once they go to a percentage, they can take it from one to another and they can do it secretly. They've done it in the past and they would do it in the future.
And so if these talks set for this week, if they collapse, what could we be looking at, do you think? A limited strike, something symbolic, or really an all-out war?
A symbolic strike is a waste of time and it's a waste of lives. The Iranians have made very clear, and I understand them. They're not going to back down simply by signaling. And I think that's been true all along. They have their strategic direction, they have their ideological, their religious direction and interests, and they're not going to compromise on them. So taking out a few targets in the sense of, okay, we hit you, we punished you a little bit, now behave yourselves, is simply not realistic. If we're talking about a full-scale operation, whether it's in phase one or after the failure of a limited operation, here I'm going to quote Winston Churchill, everybody knows how to start a war, nobody knows how to end one. To predict what happens after the immediate strike is folly, and I don't think it pays to go there.
Do you think that the U.S. has the ability to topple the regime? Is regime change militarily even achievable from the air?
No. Regime change has to come from the ground, and as we've learned, those of us in the business knew it even before the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan, it has to come from within. Now, coming from within doesn't mean without the support of outsiders, but it has to be support. So once again, the opportunity was there, and there are no guarantees, obviously, but the opportunity was there 6 weeks ago. Had America struck then decisively, strategically, again, not symbolically, but hitting IRGC targets, communications, infrastructure, and the like, that might have weakened the regime enough for the demonstration/uprising to have made that shift. Here again, the students are demonstrating. They have not gone to violence. Could they go to violence with a weakened regime? Very possibly. In other words, that could set the stage for a true uprising. Ultimately, I have a basic rule, and we saw it in the last round, and that is that an uprising revolution succeeds when the rebels have more people willing to die than the regime is willing and able to kill. The regime is certainly willing to kill. What American air power can do is reduce its capability below the level of where they can kill more people than the rebels are willing to lose. Last but not least, a key in all of this is the military, not the IRGC, but the national military. They are not ideological, and typically in these kinds of situations, they will go with the side that they believe can win. And if they believe the rebels can win, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that they can shift over, go to the rebels, and that could bring down the regime.
Now, if the U.S. strikes first, how likely is the regional escalation? Will Hezbollah join in, do you think? And do they even have the military capability at the moment, considering the past 2 years?
Hezbollah has a military capability nowhere near what it had a couple of years ago. But here, let's also keep in mind, for Hezbollah more than any other group, the survival of the Khomeiniist regime, the Islamic Republic, is critical, since Hezbollah is not a proxy of Iran, it is part of Iran. It's a subordinate of the Quds force of the IRGC. In other words, no Iran, and for all intents and purposes, there's no Hezbollah. This is not true for Hamas and Islamic Jihad, for example. They have other sources. So even if it's a suicide attempt or a suicide mission for them, in the sense that they don't have the capability, they're still going to try to do it. And of course, the IDF is preparing for that, knowing that it's a very real possibility. It's not so much a military strategic decision for Hezbollah, but rather a political strategic decision. They can't afford to let the regime in Iran go under because of the end of them as well.
Now, from Israel's perspective, is this the moment that Israel has been waiting for? Is a strike something that Israel wants, or could this spiral out of control for Israel?
Any war can spiral out of control, and a lot depends on the targeting, the skill of the American planners and its execution. Does Israel get involved or not? And again, these are the decisions that are made at the highest political levels. Do the Americans want Israeli support or not? Militarily, that would be helpful. Politically, not necessarily in the Middle East, and they have to balance that. If the Americans say stay out of it, then Israel will stay out of it, and unless Iranian strikes force an Israeli response. On the other hand, the Americans could say, you know what, you guys are really good at this. After we send the initial strikes, join in and coordinate. And these are things that again, are decided at the very, very highest levels. Will Iran attempt to hit Israel? In all probability, the answer is yes. How well can Israel and the American forces defend against that remains to be seen. That's one of the realities of war. You can estimate and you can guesstimate, but ultimately it's going to be tested on the battlefield.
I'm hearing that Netanyahu reportedly seems to be concerned. Does he have reason to be?
Concerned about what? About Iranian strikes?
About the possibility of a retaliation from Iran. Or perhaps about the fact that Trump may not strike after all.
Okay, so that was why I asked. In which direction are we going? Look, if the Americans leave the Iranians in power, essentially everything that was done in the past year will ultimately be wasted. The Iranians will rebuild. It'll take them however long it does, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. In strategic terms, that's not very long. And we're right back at square one. So a fear of leaving the Iranians to their own devices is a real fear and a legitimate one. A fear of Iranian response retaliation against Israel is also real. And here again, we've seen that they have capability. We saw it the last time, not the capabilities that they said that they had. And of course, they played it up afterwards as if they had destroyed Tel Aviv in the process. And of course, we know that was nonsense. On the other hand, their ballistic missiles, some of them did get through. They caused damage. They caused casualties. And if they're pressed to the wall, casualties, lives, yes. Yeah. If they're pressed to the wall, every system, and this includes the American nuclear strategic arm, every system has some option in there called use them or lose them. If they see that they're being really pushed to the end, they will fire everything they've got because it serves them no purpose to save, for the future. Mm-hmm. And it could cause considerable damage here. Once again, an equation, an algebra that we have no way of calculating, is it worth it to see the end of the Islamic Republic? Mm-hmm. Once again, those are questions that can be debated in at this stage. Only after the reality and time will tell will we be able to say whether it was or it wasn't.
I have to say, by now, we would have thought that we'd be in a different place. After all of these weeks, all of the threats, I think Israelis are quite surprised by the stalling and the stagnation. Are you?
I'm not surprised. Trump is a master of chaos, and the threats are part of that, which is why he's unpredictable. And let's say this, in warfare, unpredictability has its value. In diplomacy, international relations, not so much. And we're all, the whole world is watching and saying, okay, what happens next? A few weeks ago, every 24 hours it was going to happen tonight. It was going to happen tonight. And now we're looking at a possibility that may not happen in the next week or 10 days. He said 10 days, then he said 48 hours. Maybe the next one will be 3 weeks. And there's just no way of telling with him.
Right, certainly. That's why I began my questions by asking, is this 48-hour deadline, is it for real? Now, let me ask you one more question. Is it possible that the Americans will strike and Israel will not be involved? Is that a possibility at all?
It's a possibility. I can think of two possibilities or two options on that. One is the Americans say we want to do it ourselves, stay out of it. And with that, the Iranian retaliation against Israel is not terribly damaging or devastating, or not at all. It's all stopped or intercepted by the Americans and by Israeli air defenses, in which case Israel can essentially sit it out, similar to the Gulf War when the Scuds were falling here in 1991 and the Americans said, stay out of it, we don't want you involved. If it goes beyond a certain point, Israel will have no choice. In other words, here we're not talking about, and I lived through the Gulf War here as well, we're not talking about an occasional Scud coming over in the course of a couple of months. The Iranians have a capability, as we said before, of doing real damage, and that's not something Israel is going to be able to sit out. So that here again, there's a balance of we'll have to wait and see. There could very well be a case of Israel not getting involved, but that can also turn over overnight. And once again, war being unpredictable.
Have to wait and see. Let's address for a moment what's happening inside Iran right now. So you've mentioned the protests from several weeks ago. We are now seeing fresh protests on university campuses with students waving the banned pre-revolution flag. Are these protests significant, do you think? Is there a chance they'll escalate and that there will be another chance to what you mentioned earlier, another chance?
I don't think they're going to escalate on their own. I think that what's happening on the campuses now is that they're pushing the envelope. They've been told you'll be permitted to demonstrate, and the flags and that sort of thing are the edge of the envelope. But they've also been told if you turn violent, we will respond with the violence that you saw 6 weeks ago. I think that here again, we're at one of those tipping point moments. If the Americans strike while the demonstrations are going on and weaken the IRGC sufficiently so that the students believe they can ratchet it up, then we might see another uprising happening now. These demonstrations, I don't believe, are going to go on for very long. In other words, they'll go another day or two, but if they don't step it up, they'll begin to fade away. I don't think they're going to do it on their own.
In your opinion, are we at a genuine turning point, or is this just another cycle as we've seen in recent weeks?
As I said, they've learned the lesson. Pick your number, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 killed by the regime. And they have been informed reliably that what they saw the last time, they will see again, maybe even worse. So I don't think we're at a tipping point or at a critical point from within alone. I think that they will need some sort of accelerant, which would be an American strike, for example, while these protests are still hot. And how long that will be is unpredictable. This isn't an organized uprising with commanders. This is spontaneous, which has its value, but it also has its unpredictability. It can run a day, 2, 3, 5, and at any point along there, it can begin to dissipate. If the regime uses skilled anti-demonstration, anti-riot forces, as opposed to opening fire on them indiscriminately, they can also break it up. It's a tricky business, and once again, these are things that can go either way, which is why the first time around the regime let it go on for a while before they turned their weapons on them. There are no clear-cut formulas, so possible, but as I said, unlikely, in my opinion, that they will spontaneously erupt to the level if they were. They'll need some sort of an igniter, an accelerant, and that would be an American strike.
Well, Elliot Chodov, thank you very much for all of your input today.
My pleasure.
And finally, and on a different note, the National Religious Broadcasters is bringing its first ever Jerusalem Media Summit to Israel this November, marking a historic moment in the organization's 80-year history. In partnership with the government press office and I Travel Jerusalem, the summit will unite Christian and Jewish media leaders in a shared effort to push back against misinformation and rising hatred. The gathering comes on the heels of NRB's 2026 convention in Nashville and follows a solidarity mission led by CEO Troy Miller, underscoring a deepening commitment to Israel and to cooperation between faith communities. Set for November 1st through the 5th, the summit will bring journalists, communicators, influencers, and church leaders to the capital to confront the global surge of anti-Semitism and anti-Christian sentiment and to strengthen collaboration in what many describe as an ongoing information war after 2 years of conflict. Let's take a look.
NRB is proud to announce that we will be hosting the NRB Jerusalem Media Summit this fall, November 1st through the 5th. We will be convening Christian media professionals, communicators, church leaders from around the world so that together we can fight hatred.
After the announcement was made, Jerusalem Mayor Moshe Leon delivered a digital message. Let's take a listen.
Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and it is a spiritual capital of millions of believers across the globe, a city that lives in all our hearts. I hope you have time while you get here to see the city, to meet the people, to visit the holy sites, taste the flavors, and enjoy the blessings of Jerusalem.
And before we go for now, we've got some exciting news. You can now get Israel updates on our WhatsApp channel, breaking stories, live updates, and verified reports, all delivered fast and accurate. Just scan the QR code on your screen to join. That's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel. I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching.